he knows that he sucks at social skills because he probably learned that as a child. And so if you were a little kid and your parents signed you up for Little League or T-ball or whatever, and you just didn't have the knack for that, and you got benched, you just basically sucked. So you ended up kind of being the bat boy, and it was a terrible experience. I'm never playing baseball again. I suck at that. I was never any good at it. They started me way out in the outfield, and then the coach wasn't even happy with me way out there, and he just benched me, and I just sat on the bench the entire season. So now that I have been benched by the coach, and I know that I'm not a good baseball player, and then somebody comes along and says, oh, well, would you like to join this team and learn how to play baseball? It's like, no, I've already been around that block. I suck at it. No, I don't have any interest in learning baseball or learning how to be a better pitcher or a better batter. And I'm perfectly fine not playing baseball. And so that's exactly what's going on with your husband, is that he knows he's terrible at it. He's had a bad experience with it. And talking is a social activity. Of course he doesn't want to talk. And it's a shame that he feels that way, because social skills can be taught. And the give and take in conversation can be taught. And he would actually get to the point where he probably enjoy conversing and enjoy talking, because he's actually doing it fairly adeptly for the first time in his life. So he might even find some joy in having conversation about something other than his topic of interest.
I get a lot of NT wives that say, well, when we first started dating, my yet-to-be husband just did a lot of masking and presented himself as someone other than who he really was. And it was kind of deceitful. But I can promise you that your now ASD husband never had the thought of, well, I really like this girl, I want to date her, and I'm going to be deceitful and present myself as being somebody else. And then when I get comfortable with her and have her trapped, I'll just go back to my old way of behaving. Masking is not manipulation. Rather, it is a cover-up for shame, specifically a cover-up for toxic shame and toxic guilt. Healthy guilt is, I did something wrong. I didn't necessarily mean to do it, but now in retrospect, I see it was hurtful. I want to learn from this mistake. I intend not to repeat this mistake. I'm going to make amends and move forward. Toxic guilt, though, is I'm always making these social mistakes. I'm always hurting her. I'm always letting her down. I never seem to get it right. Doesn't matter what I say or do, it's never good enough. This in turn leads to toxic shame, which is because I'm always making these mistakes repeatedly and can never seem to learn from my mistakes. Therefore, I am a mistake. And so his social awkwardness becomes an identity. And he's embarrassed by that. And he purposely tries to hide that out of a sense of shame. In other words, he's thinking, if people knew who I really was, they wouldn't like me, I wouldn't be lovable, I wouldn't be acceptable, I would live the rest of my life alone. In other words, I can't really let my true colors show, because if I do, I will be rejected, ostracized, maybe even teased and bullied. I will never measure up. I'll never have what it takes to make it in the social world. So this so-called masking is a shame cover-up, not a manipulation, although I admit that from the NT female brain perspective, it certainly seems as if it's a manipulation. And he's a con man of sorts. And the reason that he changes his colors once the relationship has some mileage on it is because he's comfortable now with his NT partner. He lets down his guard because he feels that finally it's okay just to be myself. But unfortunately, after years of being chastised and reprimanded, which is how he would view it, he realizes yet again, I can't really truly relax and just be me. So this defensiveness that you see in him and these neutral comments or constructive criticisms that he downloads as an attack are the direct result of toxic shame. Feelings of not being good enough, yet again being reprimanded, looked down on, and told in no uncertain terms that he's not good enough. So what I do instead, I disconnect from people because they rarely accept me, and I connect with my special interest because it always accepts me.
I'm a big believer in facing the truth. I would rather be hurt by the truth than blinded by bullshit. I've always been that way. And I had an NT wife email me today. Says, well, you could use neurodiverse instead of autism spectrum disorder because, these guys are sensitive. And I think that, my husband is real sensitive and he doesn't want to, admit that he might have this disorder. And so you've heard of this term, right? Neurodiverse. And, it's a politically correct term and it would, be a little more sensitive. So, duly noted, but I don't think you guys are that fragile that I have to be. I'm not really into being politically correct. Plus, I use neurodiversity to describe the couples. When I say neurodiverse couples, I mean one has autism, one does not. So the reason I'm not willing to use neurodiverse for you guys is because there's no shame involved. To use neurodiverse to kind of sugarcoat it a little bit implies that there's something to be ashamed of. No. Period. ASD level 1 is what we're referring to now. There's 2 other levels. This has to do with levels of functioning. You're already aware of that. You guys are all ASD level 1, which is high functioning. So think of ASD level 1 as simply I don't like the term disorder, though, I will tell you that. Because there again, that sounds like there's something wrong or bad or to be ashamed of. So I do not like the term disorder. So I guess I do want to be politically correct on that. I prefer to call it a condition or a different way of thinking because I think that's more in alignment with the reality of things. And you could think of it as a condition of social skills being low, social needs being low, logic being high. And that's kind of your saving grace. That is your strength, your logic. We wouldn't have this computer we're talking on right now if we didn't have somebody on the autism spectrum, Asperger's syndrome, and back in that day, Bill Gates. The engineering field is full of people on the spectrum. Computer sciences, they're all over the place. It's almost a stretch to call you guys in the minority because there's so many undiagnosed people crawling around all over the planet. If we could get to the bottom of things, we might find that 30% or 40% of people, the entire people on the planet, are on the spectrum. That sounds like a bizarre exaggeration. It's not, because there's a lot of people that have these traits, but nobody has put 2 and 2 together yet or done some research and thought, hey, maybe you have this thing called ASD level 1. They just go on with life and they don't even entertain the idea. So there's more people that have it than have been diagnosed with it or that even have talked about it.
Autism spectrum disorder comes with anxiety by default. And whenever there's anxiety, moodiness and mild depression is not far behind. And I just call this moodiness a blue mood. And it's used to describe a mild form of depression, but one that is chronic, in other words, lingering throughout the lifespan. So for the person with autism spectrum disorder, this blue mood often begins in adolescence due to his or her lack of social skills and inability to fit in with the peer group, being criticized, teased, bullied, and ostracized, all of which usually result in low self-esteem and a preference for social isolation. In other words, preferring to be by oneself since trying to fit in with others is too painful. Ridicule and rejection often takes its toll over the years, resulting in not only a pervasive blue mood, but also an element of paranoia. In other words, he or she is so used to being mistreated emotionally and or verbally that he comes to expect it. So being highly suspicious of others, preparing for an attack of some kind, and jumping to defensiveness very quickly is not uncommon in adults on the autism spectrum. Oftentimes, the autistic adult's paranoid tendencies result in a self-fulfilling prophecy. In other words, their expectation of ridicule and rejection leads them to say or do something that provokes the very negative response from the other person that they so dread. For example, in anticipation of a critical comment, the person with ASD may deliver one first, inciting the other person to return the criticism. This, in turn, convinces the person that others are indeed out to get him. Unfortunately, many people with ASD not only had to endure various forms of social stress throughout the school years, they now experience much of the same at home and at their place of employment. As adults, people with this blue mood, they tend to take life too seriously. They tend to take others' comments and behavior too personally. In fact, many of those that I've worked with are unable to remember a time when they actually felt happy, enthusiastic, and motivated. They often report feeling as though they have been in a one-down position their entire life. So as a result, they can be somewhat irritable, gloomy, and negative much of the time, usually expecting the worst possible outcome when uncomfortable challenges and struggles arise. They will tend to be inactive and withdrawn, worry frequently, and are very critical of themselves as well. Most have a hard time enjoying things and having fun unless it's a solitary activity, usually one that involves their special interest. If the adult on the autism spectrum finally seeks treatment, it's not uncommon that he or she has had this problem for many years. Because a blue mood tends to develop in adolescence, the autistic individual may believe that it's normal to always feel this way. He doesn't realize that the quality of his mood is anything out of the ordinary. So it often goes unnoticed and therefore untreated. So if you wonder why your ASD spouse is so sensitive to criticism and may even view your neutral comments as criticism, you can bet that this whole thing started in childhood. He was disapproved of decades ago. He hasn't recovered from that, and current disapprovals today will cause flashbacks to the past, and he will instantly be defensive.